So hidden defects is a huge risk when buying properties, simply because if you're not an expert and you don't understand the nature of these defects, so when you buy a house, let's say, for example, that there were cracks, but they were painted over, or there's issues with the roof that you don't know about, these obviously pose a massive risk for you as a homeowner or property investor. So off the bat, the first thing that I always suggest is get someone to inspect the property when you buy it, so that you at least have some kind of report by an expert that speaks to the condition of the property. Simply because hidden defects are often identified by these experts because they know where to look for these hidden defects. They know what it looks like to paint over cracks. They are more than happy to climb into ceilings in order to assess whether there's anything wrong with the roof structure, which often comes at a massive cost to repair. Now, if you did that, or if, for example, you didn't call an expert in and you bought the property, and now you find that now there's a defect, and you pick up the phone, you call the seller, and you complain to the seller, and the seller points at their contract and says, "Sorry, there's a faucets clause," because I can almost guarantee you 90% of the time that faucets clause is immediately where the seller goes. And it might be terminology that you think people don't understand, but that faucets clause carries so much weight, and every seller knows about it, and every seller, or most sellers, are more than willing to rely on it. Why? Faucets clause brings closure to an agreement. If it's sold faucets, it means the seller gets to walk away without any implications on themselves if it turns out there's something wrong. But there's exclusions to this, and people need to understand that there's exclusions. Our law does not promote unfair dealing. It's one of the primary concepts in our law. It's if it seems unfair, you're probably going to find some exception somewhere that deals with it. And in this particular instance, we've got two. So Consumer Protection Act, number one. Number two, if the seller knew about the issue. These are the two primary exceptions. Now, Consumer Protection Act, most people understand. You buy something, it's defect, it was not in the condition that it was supposed to be in, you can send it back to a supplier. Same thing applies to a house. If you're buying it as a supply from a supplier and you yourself are a consumer. Most of the time with houses, however, people buy the houses from private sellers, and the Consumer Protection Act does not apply because it's not within the course of their business. Let's say they own one property, or maybe they hold two properties and investments. Selling the property isn't really within the course of their business. In that instance, you start looking, or start asking the question, but did the seller know? Now, going back to the example of paint over cracks, there's actual case law that where experts came to testify that there is no way that the seller did not know about these cracks or about damp issues because there was paint over it. And even though the seller protested that he bought it and it was already painted over, every expert testified that the damage and the paint was not older than the period of time for which the seller had the house, and the seller had to have known that these were issues. And by virtue of that, when he sold the property knowing that he had painted over certain cracks or damp issues, he should have known about that, should have disclosed it. And by failing to do so, he was either fraudulently misrepresented the defect, or negligently misrepresented the defect. So negligence would apply in a situation where the seller thinks it's not a serious issue, but it turns out to be a serious issue and should have disclosed it anyway. So in both those instances, there is recourse for a purchaser against the seller. If the seller genuinely did not know about a defect, then unfortunately, faucets does apply. And as a purchaser, you will not have recourse against the seller. I'm sorry.